Welcome back to another hidden truth from the Wasteland. What I am about to reveal tonight will change everything you thought you knew about who survived the Great War and who is still waiting to wake up. While everyone focused on the vaults and their twisted experiments, while survivors scraped together new lives in the ruins, something else was happening deep beneath our feet. Something that makes every conspiracy theory look like amateur speculation. They are still down there, thousands of them, frozen in time, preserved in perfect stasis, waiting for a signal that will never come. And I know because I put them there. I designed their chambers. I programmed their wake-up protocols. And then I made sure they would sleep forever because some people do not deserve a second chance at destroying the world. If you enjoy these dark revelations from the Wasteland's hidden history, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if this content speaks to you. Because what comes next is going to test everything you believe about survival and justice and whether the past should ever be allowed to return. My name was Dr. Marcus Reeves. For 15 years before the bombs fell, I worked as Chief Cryogenics Engineer for a black-budget division that officially did not exist. Not Vault Tech, though we used their research. Not Robco, though we incorporated their technology. We were something else entirely. A coalition of defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and intelligence agencies united by a single goal: to preserve the best and brightest of humanity against a future they knew was coming. The project had no official name. Internal documents referenced it only as Protocol Omega. The idea was elegantly simple and monumentally arrogant. If nuclear war was inevitable, if the vaults were insufficient, if surface survival was impossible, then we needed a backup plan. We needed to put humanity's most valuable assets on ice until the radiation cleared and the world was ready to be reclaimed. Starting in 2062, we began identifying candidates: Nobel laureates in physics and medicine, master engineers and architects, military strategists with perfect service records, corporate executives whose companies drove the American economy, artists whose work defined cultural generations, athletes with genetic profiles that represented peak human performance. We made a list of 10,000 people whose survival justified any cost, any method, any violation of law or ethics. The selection criteria were ruthlessly pragmatic. No one over 45, because younger bodies handled cryogenic suspension better. No one with chronic health conditions that might complicate the freezing process. No one whose loss would be immediately noticed and investigated. We needed people who could disappear without triggering national scandals or congressional hearings. The recruitment process varied by candidate. Some were true believers who understood the mission and volunteered eagerly. They saw Protocol Omega as their patriotic duty, their chance to ensure America's greatness would survive even nuclear annihilation. These were the easy ones. They signed their NDAs, settled their affairs quietly, and reported for processing with genuine enthusiasm. Others required more persuasion. We manufactured crises that made participation seem like their only option. A cancer diagnosis that was actually staged with falsified medical records and paid-off doctors. A financial scandal that threatened everything they built unless they accepted our protection. A national security situation where their expertise was so critical that refusing meant abandoning their country in its darkest hour. We became masters of manufactured consent, turning free choice into something that looked voluntary but was actually coercion wrapped in patriotic language. And then there were the ones who refused, despite everything. The moral objectors who saw through our justifications. The skeptics who questioned why they deserved survival more than anyone else. The difficult ones who actually had principles they refused to compromise. For these candidates, we used harsher methods. Kidnapping dressed up as emergency evacuations, drugs that created compliant amnesia, legal threats against family members who would face prosecution unless cooperation was ensured. We did what was necessary. We always did what was necessary. The bunkers themselves were engineering marvels that made the vaults look primitive by comparison. We built 23 facilities across North America, each one buried at least 500 feet underground in geologically stable locations far from major cities and military targets. Abandoned mines in Colorado, hollowed-out mountains in Montana, desert caverns in Nevada that had been secret weapons testing sites. Every location was chosen for its remoteness, its natural protection, and its proximity to resources that future inhabitants would need after waking. Each bunker could hold between 300 and 600 people in cryogenic suspension. The chambers were arranged in massive temperature-controlled vaults, rows upon rows of gleaming metal pods connected to central cooling systems that would operate for centuries without human intervention. The engineering was so far beyond contemporary civilian technology that even other black projects did not know how we achieved it. The cooling systems used a proprietary cryogenic fluid developed by a pharmaceutical company that will remain nameless. It was not liquid nitrogen. It was not anything the public science community had ever published papers about. This fluid could reduce human body temperature to negative 180 degrees Celsius without forming ice crystals that would shred cellular structures. The human body remained in a state of perfect suspended animation. All biological processes halted, but all cellular integrity maintained. The pods themselves were self-contained life support systems. Each one monitored vital signs, adjusted cooling levels, administered anti-crystallization compounds, and maintained neural activity at just enough level to prevent brain death, but not enough to allow consciousness or dreaming. The people inside were not sleeping. They were existing in a state between life and death, preserved perfectly, aware of nothing, experiencing nothing, waiting for reactivation protocols that would reverse the process and return them to full consciousness. Power came from multiple redundant sources. Geothermal taps that converted Earth's internal heat into electricity. Nuclear microreactors using technology decades ahead of commercial power plants. Backup battery systems that could sustain operations for years if primary power failed. We built these facilities to last for 500 years minimum. We were not taking any chances with something as mundane as power supply failure. Security was paranoid even by military standards. The bunker entrances were hidden behind false rock formations, disguised mine equipment, abandoned buildings that looked decrepit on the surface but concealed elevator shafts descending hundreds of feet. Each facility had multiple defensive layers, automated turrets that would engage any unauthorized intruders, blast doors that could withstand direct nuclear strikes, self-destruct systems that would collapse entire sections rather than allow compromise of the cryogenic chambers. The personnel who built these facilities thought they were working on separate projects. The excavation crews believed they were digging emergency government shelters. The electrical engineers thought they were installing backup power for military command centers. The cryogenics technicians assumed they were preparing medical research stations. Only a handful of people knew the full scope of Protocol Omega. Only a dozen of us understood we were building humanity's hidden reserve, a secret backup plan that would let the elite survive and reclaim the world after everyone else died. I was one of those dozen. I knew everything. I approved every design decision. I verified every system worked exactly as intended. And for years, I believed we were doing something noble. I believed we were preserving the best of humanity against an unthinkable catastrophe. I believed the moral weight of our choices was justified by the magnitude of what we were trying to save. The processing of candidates began in 2068. We started small, just a few dozen people per month, gradually ramping up as we refined our procedures and expanded our facilities. Each candidate underwent extensive medical screening, psychological evaluation, and legal documentation. They signed power of attorney agreements, giving trusted representatives control of their assets during their suspension. They recorded messages for family members, explaining their absence with cover stories we crafted specifically for each situation. They prepared themselves mentally for the reality that everyone they knew might be dead when they woke up. The actual freezing process took approximately 18 hours from start to finish. First came the medical prep, clearing the body of any toxins or contaminants that might cause complications during suspension. Then the gradual cool-down, reducing body temperature in carefully controlled stages while monitoring every vital sign for signs of distress. The introduction of cryogenic fluids through intravenous lines, replacing blood with the proprietary compounds that would keep cells intact at impossibly low temperatures. Finally, the deep freeze, lowering the pod temperature to operational levels and confirming all biological processes, had halted successfully. I watched thousands of people go through this process. I saw their faces as they lay down in the pods for the last time before suspension. Some were excited, viewing this as an adventure, a chance to wake up in a future they helped shape. Some were terrified but resigned, believing they had no better option. Some were drugged and compliant, their consent manufactured through chemical means because we could not risk them changing their minds. Every single one of them trusted us. They trusted that we would wake them at the right time. They trusted that the facilities would function as promised. They trusted that when they opened their eyes again, the world would be ready for their return and grateful for their preservation. I made sure that trust was betrayed. The turning point came in 2073, 4 years before the bombs fell. I was conducting a routine inspection of Bunker 7 in Montana, one of our largest facilities, with 600 pods already occupied and operational. The monitoring station showed all systems functioning normally. Every vital sign was stable. Every pod was maintaining perfect temperature. Everything was working exactly as designed. I found the room by accident, a section of the facility that was not on any official blueprints. A hidden chamber accessible only through a maintenance corridor that required biometric authorization I should not have had, but acquired through security exploits I had been developing for years. Inside that room were computers and filing cabinets and documents that revealed the truth about Protocol Omega. We were not preserving the best of humanity. We were preserving the most complicit. Every person in those pods had been selected not just for their skills or genetic profiles, but for their willingness to overlook atrocities. Scientists who had conducted unethical experiments on unwitting subjects. Corporate executives who profited from environmental destruction and worker exploitation. Military officers who followed illegal orders without question. Intelligence operatives who tortured and assassinated in the name of national security. Artists and athletes who served as propaganda tools, their fame used to distract populations from government crimes. The documents spelled it out explicitly. Protocol Omega existed to preserve the people who helped create the conditions that led to nuclear war. The weapons manufacturers who sold to both sides, the politicians who escalated tensions for electoral gain, the media figures who spread fear and hatred, the financial criminals who crashed economies and walked away with billions, the architects of the system that made annihilation inevitable. And the wake-up protocols were not designed to activate when the world was safe. They were designed to activate when the world was conquered, when everyone else was dead or subjugated, when the surface was clear of survivors who might object to the return of the people who destroyed everything in the first place. The true purpose of Protocol Omega was not preservation. It was inheritance. The people in those pods expected to wake up as rulers of whatever remained, their status and power intact, their crimes forgotten, their right to control humanity's future unchallenged because they were the only ones left with pre-war knowledge and resources. I spent 2 weeks reviewing every file in that hidden room. I learned things that made me physically ill. I learned about experiments conducted on vault populations using Protocol Omega facilities as control centers. I learned about manufactured wars and planned genocides and systematic elimination of undesirable populations. I learned that every terrible thing I suspected about the people running the world was actually worse than I imagined. And I learned that I was complicit in all of it. Every pod I activated, every system I designed, every person I helped freeze was another brick in a monument to human evil. I had spent years believing I was saving humanity when I was actually preserving its monsters. What do you think someone should do when they discover they have been helping the wrong side? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because my answer to that question changed everything that followed. I could have gone public. I could have leaked the documents to journalists, exposed Protocol Omega to congressional oversight, revealed the conspiracy to anyone who would listen. But it was 2073. The world was already on the edge of nuclear war. Governments were paranoid and repressive. Whistleblowers were disappearing. Media outlets were controlled by the same corporate interests that funded Protocol Omega. No one would have believed me, and even if they did, what could they do? The facilities were already built. The people were already frozen. The systems were operational and self-sustaining. Violence was an option. I could sabotage the facilities, destroy the pods, kill everyone in suspended animation before they could wake up. But that felt too much like murder. These people were criminals and conspirators, but they were unconscious and helpless. Killing them while they slept felt like execution without trial, and I was not ready to become that kind of person yet. So I chose a third option. I decided to trap them exactly where they were. I would let them sleep forever, preserved perfectly, maintained by systems that would never fail, kept in stasis until the heat death of the universe if necessary. They wanted to outlast everyone else and inherit the Earth. Instead, they would outlast everyone else and inherit nothing. The wake-up protocols for all 23 bunkers ran through a central control system located in a hardened facility beneath the Mojave Desert. This system monitored surface conditions, tracked radiation levels, assessed global population patterns, and determined when circumstances met the predetermined criteria for beginning reactivation procedures. It was designed to be fully automated, requiring no human intervention, ensuring that even if everyone involved with Protocol Omega died, the sleepers would still wake up at the appropriate time. I had helped design that central control system. I knew every back door, every vulnerability, every way to manipulate its programming. Starting in 2074, I began making modifications. Nothing dramatic or obvious. Just small changes to the evaluation algorithms, subtle adjustments to the criteria that would trigger wake-up protocols. I made the system progressively more paranoid, more risk-averse, more demanding of impossible conditions before it would consider reactivation safe. The original protocols required radiation levels below 10 rads per hour, stable surface temperatures, and evidence of functional ecosystem recovery. My modified protocols required radiation levels below 0.1 rads per hour, which would take approximately 2,000 years to achieve naturally. They required global temperature stability within 0.5 degrees for 50 consecutive years, which would be impossible in the climate chaos following nuclear war. They required verified absence of hostile surface populations, but I defined hostile so broadly that any human society with weapons or territorial claims would qualify. I built in circular dependencies and logical contradictions. The system would not wake the sleepers until it verified safe conditions, but it could not verify safe conditions without sending reconnaissance drones. And the reconnaissance drones would not deploy until preliminary wake-up sequences began. I created an infinite loop of caution, a logical trap that would keep evaluating and recalculating forever without ever reaching the threshold for action. And I encrypted everything behind authentication protocols that only I understood. The system would accept override commands, but only with credentials that existed nowhere except in my own memory. I made myself the single point of failure for Protocol Omega, the one person who could release the sleepers or condemn them to eternal stasis. Then I added one final modification, a timer that would activate if I died or went missing for more than 90 days. This timer would not wake the sleepers. Instead, it would corrupt the central control system's core programming, introducing errors that would make the system progressively less reliable until it eventually crashed completely. If I died, Protocol Omega died with me. The bunkers would lose connection to central control. The pods would continue operating on local systems, maintaining suspension indefinitely, but without the wake-up signal that only central control could transmit. The sleepers would be trapped in working pods managed by orphaned facilities with no way to end their suspension. I finished the modifications in late 2076, 1 year before the bombs fell, 1 year before everything I feared came true, in ways worse than anyone predicted. I did not tell anyone what I had done. I did not confess my sabotage or explain my reasoning. I simply continued working, attending meetings, reviewing reports, maintaining my cover as a loyal Protocol Omega engineer right up until the moment the world ended, October 23, 2077. I was at the Central Control Facility when the early warning systems detected incoming missiles. The facility was designed to survive direct nuclear strikes, and it did. The blast doors sealed. The shock absorption systems engaged. The underground complex rode out the initial detonations without any damage to critical systems. We were safe, if you can call being buried in a bunker while civilization dies above you safety. There were 30 of us in that facility. Engineers, technicians, security personnel. All of us had known this moment was coming. All of us had prepared for exactly this scenario. The protocols were clear. We would shelter in place for 6 months, monitoring surface conditions, maintaining the central control system, ensuring Protocol Omega continued functioning exactly as designed. Then we would either evacuate to one of the bunkers or remain at central control depending on radiation levels and facility integrity. But the protocols assumed we were all loyal. They assumed no one had sabotaged the system. They assumed we were all committed to waking the sleepers when conditions allowed. That assumption was wrong. I waited 3 days before revealing what I had done. 3 days of watching my colleagues work frantically to keep systems operational, to maintain contact with the bunkers, to prepare for the reactivation sequences they believed would begin within years or decades at most. On the 4th day, during a staff meeting about long-term facility operations, I told them the truth. I explained how I had modified the wake-up protocols. I described the impossible criteria I had programmed. I detailed the authentication locks that only I could open. I showed them the timer that would destroy everything if I died. I laid it all out calmly and completely, making sure they understood exactly what I had done and why they could not undo it. The reactions were what I expected. Shock first, then anger, then desperate attempts to override my changes or lock me out of the system. They tried everything. They pulled me from the control terminals and attempted to access my modifications themselves. They threatened me with violence if I did not reverse the sabotage. They offered deals and compromises and appeals to loyalty and morality. None of it worked, because I had built my trap too well. The system was corrupted at its foundation. Every command pathway led back to authentication protocols that required my credentials. Every attempt to bypass my modifications triggered security lockouts that made the system progressively less stable. The more they tried to fix what I had broken, the worse the situation became. It took them 4 days to accept that they could not undo the damage without my cooperation, and that cooperation would never come. That was when they made their choice. If they could not have Protocol Omega functioning as designed, then no one would have it. On the 8th day after the bombs fell, the facility's security chief put a gun to my head and told me I had 60 seconds to restore the original protocols or die. I refused. I explained that killing me would trigger the timer and destroy central control completely. I explained that my death would not save Protocol Omega but would permanently doom it. I explained that the only way to preserve any possibility of future reactivation was to keep me alive and try to convince me over time to change my mind. He shot me anyway. Not fatally, but painfully. A bullet through my shoulder, another through my leg. He told me the next one would be through my skull unless I complied. I still refused, because I had one advantage they did not know about. The same advantage that would keep me alive in ways they could not predict. Before joining Protocol Omega, I had undergone experimental cellular regeneration therapy. It was a new treatment being developed for long-duration space missions, something that would let astronauts survive years in space without aging or accumulating radiation damage. The therapy modified cellular repair mechanisms, dramatically enhanced healing rates, and extended human lifespan by factors of 5 or 10, depending on variables we did not fully understand yet. I had volunteered for the trial program in 2065. The therapy worked better than anyone expected. My wounds healed in hours instead of weeks. My aging slowed to almost nothing. Radiation that would kill normal humans barely affected me. I had become something more than baseline human, something designed for survival in extreme conditions. The security chief's bullets hurt terribly, but they did not incapacitate me for long. Within 6 hours, the wounds had closed. Within 24 hours, I was mobile again. The facility staff watched in amazement and horror as I healed from injuries that should have left me bleeding out on the floor. They realized they could not threaten me with violence because my body would just repair itself. They could not kill me quickly without risking the timer. They were trapped with someone who had sabotaged their life's work and could not be easily removed. The standoff lasted for 3 weeks. They tried reasoning with me, tried arguing that the people in the pods deserved a chance at life, regardless of what they had done before the war. They tried emotional appeals, reminding me that many of the sleepers had families and loved ones who would never see them again if I kept them frozen. They tried everything except actually addressing why I had done this in the first place, why I believed these people did not deserve to wake up. Finally, they accepted defeat. They could not change my mind. They could not override my modifications. They could not kill me without destroying everything. All they could do was try to maintain the facility and hope that someday I would reconsider, or that someone would figure out how to break my encryption. On the 24th day after the bombs fell, they locked me in a storage room with minimal supplies and sealed the door. They decided to isolate me rather than kill me, keeping me alive to prevent the timer from activating, but removing me from access to any systems I could damage further. They would maintain central control themselves, keeping the connection to the bunkers operational, even though the wake-up protocols were corrupted beyond repair. I spent 2 months in that storage room, 2 months with nothing but recycled air, rationed food, and the knowledge that 10,000 people were sleeping underground because I had decided they should never wake up. 2 months questioning whether I had made the right choice, or whether I was just another tyrant, imposing my will on others in the name of some greater good. The answer came when the facility reactor began failing. The bombs had damaged underground infrastructure in ways we did not initially realize. Water tables had shifted. Coolant systems were corroded by contaminated groundwater. The reactor that powered central control was slowly dying, and the engineers could not fix it without risking meltdown. They had a choice. They could attempt repairs and risk destroying the facility. They could evacuate and abandon central control, letting it fail naturally over years or decades. Or they could let me out and let me make modifications that might extend the reactor's operational life long enough for someone to figure out a real solution. They chose evacuation. 27 of them left the facility, taking surface suits and heading for the nearest bunker site. They left behind 3 volunteers to maintain systems as long as possible, to keep central control functioning until the reactor finally gave out. And they left me locked in storage, still alive, still preventing the timer from activating, but now isolated in a dying facility with no way out. The 3 volunteers lasted 6 months before radiation exposure became fatal. The facility shielding was not perfect. Background radiation slowly accumulated in their bodies. They worked heroically, maintaining systems far longer than anyone could reasonably expect, but eventually their bodies failed. I heard them die through the walls of my storage room. I heard them calling for help that never came. I heard them accepting their fate with the same grim determination that defined everyone who had worked on Protocol Omega. Then I was alone in a massive underground facility with a failing reactor, failing life support, and no way to escape. The storage room door was locked from the outside with mechanisms I could not reach. The walls were too thick to break through. I had food and water for maybe another month. After that, I would starve or suffocate or die from radiation as the shielding continued degrading. Except I did not die. My cellular regeneration kept me alive through conditions that should have been fatal. When the food ran out, my body adapted, slowing my metabolism to almost nothing. When the air became toxic with radiation, my cells repaired the damage faster than it accumulated. When the reactor finally melted down and the facility filled with heat and poison, my body survived by entering a state of hibernation that let me endure environmental extremes that would cook normal humans alive. I do not remember much about the years that followed. My consciousness faded to almost nothing, just enough awareness to register time passing, pain recurring, systems failing around me. I existed in a state between life and death, not quite frozen like the sleepers in their pods, but not truly alive either. A living corpse trapped in a collapsing facility, maintained by cellular regeneration, that would not let me die no matter how much I wanted to. The facility fell apart around me over decades. The reactor containment failed completely. The blast doors corroded and collapsed. Surface debris shifted and eventually broke through the ceiling, creating holes that let in contaminated air and radioactive rain. The storage room where I was imprisoned slowly became part of a larger underground cave system as walls deteriorated and rooms merged together. I drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes I was aware enough to understand my situation. Sometimes I hallucinated conversations with people who were dead or frozen, or had never existed. Sometimes I felt my body healing from damage I did not remember receiving. Time became meaningless. Years passed like seconds. Seconds stretched into eternities. I lost track of everything except the certainty that I was still alive and still preventing Protocol Omega from completing its mission. The awakening came suddenly. One moment I was lost in hibernation dreams. The next moment I was conscious and alert, with someone shaking my shoulder and shouting in my face. I opened my eyes to see a figure in a vault suit, young and scared, illuminated by the light of a Pip-Boy glowing in the darkness. His name was Thomas. He was from Vault 34, searching for weapons to defend his home from something he called the Legion. He had found the ruins of the central control facility while exploring underground tunnels. He had found me buried under debris in what used to be a storage room, barely breathing, covered in radiation burns that healed as he watched. He thought I was a ghoul at first. My skin had taken on a strange texture from centuries of radiation damage and cellular regeneration. My hair had fallen out and grown back white. I looked like I had been dead for years, and then decided to get up and keep moving. He nearly ran when I opened my eyes. He stayed because I started talking, and ghouls do not usually speak coherently in complete sentences. I told him everything. I told him about Protocol Omega and the bunkers and the 10,000 sleepers preserved underground. I told him about my sabotage and the modifications I made to prevent anyone from waking. I told him about the timer that would destroy central control if I died, and the credentials only I possessed that could restore the wake-up protocols. He listened with growing horror and fascination. Then he asked me the question that changed everything. He asked me if the sleepers were still down there, still alive, still waiting after all this time. I did not know. 2 centuries had passed since I last had access to monitoring systems. The bunkers were designed to operate for 500 years minimum, but design specifications and reality do not always align. Coolant systems could have failed. Power supplies could have degraded. Seismic activity could have damaged facilities. Any number of things could have gone wrong without central control monitoring and issuing warnings. Thomas offered to help me find out. He had contacts in the new California Republic, people with resources and technology that might let us check on the bunkers without triggering any defensive systems. He was curious about what we would find. He wanted to know if my sabotage had worked, or if I had just delayed the inevitable. We left the ruined facility together. We traveled west through Wasteland that was recovering in ways I never imagined possible. Communities had formed. Trade routes connected settlements. People were building real civilization from the ashes. The world had moved on without the sleepers, without the preserved elite, without any help from the people who thought they deserved to inherit everything. Over the next year, Thomas helped me investigate 3 bunker sites. Bunker 7 in Montana, the one where I first discovered the truth. Bunker 14 in Nevada, one of the largest facilities. Bunker 19 in Colorado, the one with the most advanced systems. We approached each site carefully, checking for security systems, mapping out defensive perimeters, trying to determine what was still functional. All 3 bunkers were intact. The entrances were sealed. The defensive systems were still operational. Automated turrets tracked us when we got too close. Security sensors swept the area with detection beams. Everything indicated the facilities were still powered, still functioning, still maintaining the people inside exactly as designed. But were the sleepers still alive? We could not tell without accessing internal monitoring systems, and I no longer had credentials that would work. The authentication protocols I had created were locked behind biometric scans and password phrases I had not used in 200 years. My fingerprints had changed from radiation exposure and regeneration. My retina patterns had shifted. The security systems did not recognize me as the person who created them. We needed access to central control. We needed to reach the facility's core systems and determine the status of all 23 bunkers. We needed to know if Protocol Omega had survived my sabotage or if all those people had died in their pods while I was hibernating in a storage room. The problem was that central control was a radiation-soaked ruin. The reactor meltdown had contaminated everything. The levels were lethal even for ghouls, and certainly lethal for someone like Thomas, whose vault suit provided only minimal protection. Going back inside meant risking his life for information about people who were probably better off staying frozen anyway. I went alone. My cellular regeneration could handle radiation that would kill anyone else. I descended back into the facility ruins, navigating through collapsed tunnels and flooded chambers and rooms filled with radioactive steam. I found my way to the central monitoring station, or what was left of it. Computers that had been offline for centuries. Servers that had corroded into useless metal sculptures. Display screens cracked and dark. But the backup systems were intact. Deep in the facility's lowest levels, protected by additional shielding and redundant cooling, the emergency monitoring network still functioned. These systems were designed to survive anything short of a direct hit from an orbital strike. They had weathered the reactor meltdown and the facility collapse and 2 centuries of neglect. They were still maintaining weak connections to all 23 bunker sites, still collecting minimal status data, still confirming that somewhere out there, the pods were operating. I accessed the backup systems using credentials I had not thought about in 200 years. Passwords came back from memories I thought I had lost during my hibernation. The system recognized me. It granted access. It displayed status reports that had been accumulating for 2 centuries without anyone to read them. The news was mixed. Of the 23 bunkers, 17 were still fully operational, all systems functioning nominally, all pods maintaining proper temperatures and cryogenic fluid circulation, all life signs stable. The people inside were alive, preserved exactly as intended, sleeping through centuries while the world rebuilt itself without them. 6 bunkers had failed. Bunker 3 suffered a catastrophic coolant leak in 2089, just 12 years after the war. All 450 occupants died as temperatures rose and their bodies thawed improperly. Bunker 8 lost power in 2143 when a cave-in damaged its geothermal tap. Everyone inside suffocated or froze, depending on which system failed first. Bunker 12, 15, 18, and 22 all experienced various mechanical failures over the decades. Equipment wore out. Backup systems did not activate. Redundancies proved insufficient. The people inside died without ever knowing anything went wrong, passing from suspended animation to death without regaining consciousness. That left 8,450 sleepers still alive in 17 functional bunkers. Most of the original number. Most of the people I had condemned to eternal suspension. They were still down there, still waiting, still preserved by systems that had no way to wake them, because I had made sure the protocols would never trigger. The monitoring system showed something else, too. My timer had never activated. The failsafe I designed to destroy everything if I died or went missing had somehow never triggered, despite my centuries of hibernation. I examined the code and found the problem. I had programmed the timer to check for my death or extended absence every 90 days. But I had not died. My cellular regeneration had kept me technically alive, maintaining just enough biological activity to register as a valid life sign. The timer saw me as alive but isolated, which was not the same as dead or missing. It continued its countdown year after year without ever reaching zero because the conditions for activation were never met. By pure accident, I had kept Protocol Omega's override capabilities intact. If I chose to, I could restore the original wake-up protocols. I could program new criteria that would trigger reactivation. I could bring all 8,450 sleepers back to consciousness and let them inherit the world they planned to rule. Or I could do nothing. I could walk away and let them sleep forever. Let the systems operate until they eventually failed from age and entropy. Let the sleepers die peacefully in their pods without ever knowing how long they waited or why they never woke. Or I could destroy everything permanently. I could trigger the self-destruct systems I had installed in every bunker. I could ensure the sleepers died quickly rather than slowly. I could end Protocol Omega once and for all in a way that left no possibility of future resurrection. I spent 3 days in that monitoring station considering my options. Thomas waited on the surface, unable to reach me through the radiation, unable to know if I was alive or dead or lost in the ruins. I sat alone with computers displaying status reports for 17 bunkers holding 8,450 people who had helped destroy the world and then tried to escape the consequences. These were not innocent people. The files I had read centuries ago were clear about who they were and what they had done. War profiteers who sold weapons to both sides of every conflict. Corporate executives who destroyed environments and exploited workers in pursuit of profit. Politicians who started wars for electoral advantage. Scientists who conducted unethical experiments on unwilling subjects. Media figures who spread propaganda and hatred. The architects of the system that made nuclear annihilation inevitable. But they were also people who had been asleep for 200 years. Whatever crimes they committed were in a world that no longer existed. The structures they exploited were gone. The systems they manipulated had collapsed. The people they harmed were dead or scattered. Waking them now would not restore their power or let them reclaim what they lost. They would wake up to a world that had moved on without them. A world that did not need their expertise or their leadership or their money. Would they adapt? Would they integrate into Wasteland society and contribute something positive? Or would they try to reassert control, try to rebuild the hierarchies that put them on top, try to turn the new California Republic and other rising civilizations into tools for their own advancement? I did not know. I could not know. The future was uncertain in ways that made any decision feel like gambling with consequences I could not predict. But I knew one thing. The choice was not mine to make alone anymore. Protocol Omega was built on the assumption that a small group of people had the right to decide who survived and who inherited the future. I had sabotaged it based on the same assumption. I had decided unilaterally that these people did not deserve to wake up, that their crimes justified permanent suspension, that I knew better than anyone else what the world needed. Both approaches were wrong. Both were examples of the same arrogance that led to nuclear war in the first place, the belief that some people were qualified to make decisions for everyone else without consultation or consent, the belief that expertise or knowledge justified overriding democratic principles and individual autonomy. Thomas and I traveled to the new California Republic capital. We requested a meeting with the Council, the elected representatives who governed the largest post-war civilization in North America. I told them everything. I showed them the monitoring data. I explained what Protocol Omega was and who the sleepers were and what choices we now faced regarding their future. The Council debated for weeks. Some argued the sleepers should be destroyed as war criminals whose survival would threaten the fragile peace that had been built. Others argued they should be woken and put on trial, their crimes examined publicly so history would not forget what led to the Great War. Still others argued they should be left sleeping, neither killed nor revived, preserved as a reminder of what humanity once was. The final vote was surprisingly unanimous. The Council decided the sleepers should remain in suspension until proper legal and ethical frameworks could be established for handling them. The NCR would send expeditions to secure the bunker sites, prevent raiders or other factions from accessing them, and maintain the facilities until society was stable enough to address the complicated questions their existence raised. In the meantime, they would not be destroyed, and they would not be woken. They would simply wait, as they had waited for 2 centuries, while the living world debated what to do with the preserved past. I agreed to transfer all authentication credentials and technical documentation to NCR authorities. I taught their technicians how to access the monitoring systems and maintain connections to the bunkers. I provided everything they would need to eventually wake the sleepers if they decided that was appropriate, or to humanely terminate suspension if they decided that was necessary. But I kept one secret. I did not tell them about the hidden files I had discovered in 2073, the documents proving what the sleepers had done and why they had been selected. I kept copies encrypted in my Pip-Boy, evidence that might be needed someday, but that I did not trust to any government or organization, no matter how well-intentioned. Because I had learned my lesson about concentrating power and information in a single authority. The NCR might be better than what came before, but they were still human, still fallible, still capable of making terrible decisions while believing they were doing the right thing. That was 5 years ago. Today, the bunker sites are secured NCR military facilities. The pods continue operating under automated systems that I designed to be self-sufficient. The sleepers remain in suspension, their future undecided, their past mostly forgotten by a world that has moved on to different concerns. I visit the monitoring stations occasionally, checking status reports, confirming systems are still functional. Every time I see those life signs displaying stable vitals for 8,450 people, I wonder what they are experiencing. If they dream in suspension, or if their consciousness is truly blank. If some part of them knows they have been sleeping for over 200 years, or if time means nothing in their frozen state. I wonder what they would think if they knew their plan had failed completely, that the world did not wait for their return, that humanity rebuilt without their guidance, or their genetics, or their preserved knowledge, that the future belongs to people they would have considered inferior, undesirable, disposable. Would they be humbled by that knowledge? Would they accept that their assumptions about their own importance were wrong? Or would they be angry, resentful, determined to reclaim what they believe they deserve? I do not know. But I am certain that decision should not be made by one person or even one government. It should be made by a society that has time to consider all the implications, that has the stability to handle whatever consequences follow, that has moved far enough beyond the old world's mistakes to judge the people who made them fairly. That time has not come yet. Maybe it never will. Maybe the sleepers will remain in their pods until the systems finally fail in another 3 centuries and they die without ever knowing they outlived everything they valued. Maybe that is the kindest ending for everyone involved. But the bunkers are still down there, hidden and secured, maintained by systems that will not fail for generations. The sleepers are still alive, preserved perfectly, waiting for a signal that may never come. And I am still here, the last living person who knows the complete truth about Protocol Omega, carrying evidence of crimes that might never see justice. Every night, I look at the stars and think about the orbital vaults that other Vault Tech conspirator talked about. I think about all the different ways the powerful tried to escape the consequences of their choices. Some went to space. Some went underground in regular vaults with twisted experiments. Some froze themselves in secret bunkers, hoping to wake up to a conquered world. All of them failed. All of them either died or became trapped, or ended up less important than they imagined. The world did not wait for any of them. It rebuilt itself through the efforts of ordinary people who refused to give up even when giving up seemed like the only rational choice. That is the real lesson of Protocol Omega. Not that the sleepers were monsters, though many of them were. Not that I was a hero for stopping them, because I am not sure I was. The lesson is that no one gets to press pause on history and resume when it is convenient. No one gets to sit out the hard parts and return for the victory parade. The people who survive are the people who stay and fight and build and suffer through all the darkness until they find their way to something like light. The sleepers missed all of that. They missed 2 centuries of struggle and adaptation and incremental progress. They preserved their bodies, but lost their context. If they ever wake up, they will be relics from another age, people whose skills and knowledge and worldviews were shaped by circumstances that no longer exist. Maybe that is punishment enough. Maybe letting them wake up to that reality, to the knowledge that they are irrelevant in the world they thought they would inherit. Maybe that is justice in a way that execution or eternal suspension never could be. But that is not my decision to make anymore. I gave up that authority when I transferred the credentials to the NCR. I am just a witness now, just someone who knows the secret history and occasionally checks to make sure the sleepers are still sleeping. There are 17 bunkers scattered across the Western territories. Each one contains between 300 and 600 people who have been in suspended animation for 204 years. Each one is a time capsule preserving the worst of the old world's elite. Each one represents a decision that future generations will have to make about justice and mercy and whether the past deserves a second chance. I think about them often. I think about Senator Morrison in Bunker 7, the man who voted for war appropriations while his constituents starved. I think about Dr. Elizabeth Chen in Bunker 14, who conducted radiation experiments on unwitting subjects to develop better weapons. I think about corporate executive Frank Harrison in Bunker 19, who profited from environmental destruction that poisoned millions. I think about all of them sleeping peacefully, while the people they harmed suffered through nuclear winter and radiation sickness and the slow collapse of civilization. I think about how they expected to wake up to a cleaned world ready for their leadership. I think about how wrong they were, and I think about the 6 bunkers that failed. The 1,550 people who died in their pods from mechanical failures or power losses, or simple entropy wearing down systems that were supposed to last forever. They died, believing they would wake up someday. They died without ever knowing they had already lost everything that mattered to them. Is that better or worse than the 8,450 who are still alive but trapped? I genuinely do not know. Death is final, but at least it ends uncertainty. Suspension is preservation, but it is also imprisonment in a state that cannot be called life or death. The monitoring systems will continue operating for at least another 3 centuries if nothing goes catastrophically wrong. That means the people in those pods could remain in suspension until the year 2400 or beyond. They could sleep through another 2 centuries of human history, miss the next great crisis or golden age, or whatever humanity builds from this foundation. And they will miss it, because I decided they did not deserve to participate. Because I looked at their records, and their crimes, and their complicity in creating the apocalypse, and I concluded that the world was better off without them. I made myself judge and executioner and gatekeeper for the future. Was I right? The Wasteland seems to be managing fine without them. The NCR is growing stronger. Communities are forming. Technology is being rediscovered and improved. Humanity is rebuilding in ways that the pre-war world never imagined possible. None of that required the preserved elite to wake up and take charge. But maybe that is not the right measure. Maybe the question is not whether the world needs them, but whether they have a right to wake up regardless of what they did. Maybe punishment should have limits. Maybe 2 centuries in suspension is enough, and anything more becomes cruelty rather than justice. I struggle with these questions constantly. I have access to the wake-up protocols even though I transferred the credentials. I built back doors into the system that only I know about. I could restore the original programming right now if I wanted to. I could trigger reactivation sequences for all 17 bunkers and let them wake up to a world that has forgotten they exist. But every time I consider it, I remember what I read in those hidden files. I remember the experiments and the exploitation and the casual cruelty of people who saw human suffering as acceptable cost for their own advancement. I remember that these are not innocent people who made mistakes. These are people who systematically harmed others for personal gain and then tried to escape the consequences. Do people like that deserve second chances? Do they deserve to wake up at all? Or does society have a right to say some crimes are too severe, some complicity too complete, some responsibility too heavy to ever be forgiven? I do not have answers. I just have questions that keep me awake at night, staring at status reports showing 8,450 stable life signs in 17 bunkers scattered across the wasteland. 80,150 people who might wake up tomorrow or might sleep forever, depending on choices that have not been made yet. If you have been listening to this entire confession, you might wonder why I am telling you all of this. You might wonder what I expect anyone to do with this information. The truth is, I do not know. Maybe I just needed to tell someone before I die, needed to make sure the story of Protocol Omega does not die with me. Because I am not immortal despite the cellular regeneration. I am aging slowly, but I am still aging. In another century or 2, I will die. When I do, the back doors I built into the system will die with me. The hidden files proving the sleeper's crimes will be locked in my Pip-Boy with encryption that no one else can break. The complete truth about Protocol Omega will be lost, unless I tell it now. Unless I record this confession and make sure someone else knows what really happened and why those bunkers exist and who is sleeping inside them. Someone needs to know so future generations can make informed decisions about what to do with the last remnants of the old world elite. The NCR knows about the bunkers and the sleepers, but they do not know everything. They do not know about the hidden files, or the back doors, or the full extent of what was planned. They do not know that Protocol Omega was not just about preserving the best of humanity, but about ensuring the worst of humanity would inherit everything after everyone else died. That knowledge matters. It matters because without it, future people might wake the sleepers thinking they are rescuing victims of circumstance. They might integrate these people into society without understanding what they represent. They might give power and authority to people who used power and authority to harm millions before the bombs fell. So I am telling you, I am putting this information into the world in a form that can be shared and discussed and considered. I am making sure that when the time comes to decide the sleeper's fate, whoever makes that decision has access to the complete truth. What should be done with them? I genuinely do not know. I have been thinking about this question for over 200 years, and I still do not have a confident answer. Every option seems wrong in different ways. If they are destroyed while still in suspension, that is execution without trial. Murder of helpless people who cannot defend themselves. It does not matter that they were complicit in terrible things. Killing unconscious people is still killing unconscious people. If they are woken and put on trial, where do you find judges and juries who can fairly evaluate crimes committed in a world that no longer exists? How do you prosecute someone for actions that were legal at the time, even if they were immoral? How do you punish people for helping create a nuclear war that everyone involved believed was justified or necessary? If they are left in suspension indefinitely, that is indefinite imprisonment, without charge or conviction or any legal process. It is condemning people to a state worse than death, conscious enough to exist but not conscious enough to experience anything, trapped forever in a technological purgatory they cannot escape. Every option violates some principle of justice or mercy. Every choice leads to consequences that trouble my conscience. That is why I passed the decision to others, why I gave the NCR access and authority rather than keeping it for myself. But I kept the evidence. I kept the files proving what these people did. Because if society decides to wake them, if people argue they deserve second chances, then someone needs to present the full record of what they did to deserve suspension in the first place. The files are horrific. I will not detail everything they contain, because some things are too disturbing to share casually. But I will say this. The people in those bunkers were not selected randomly. They were not preserved because they happened to be wealthy or connected or skilled. They were preserved because they demonstrated complete loyalty to a system that killed millions for profit and power. Senator Morrison did not just vote for war appropriations. He personally lobbied to reduce safety standards at nuclear power plants because it increased profit margins for companies that funded his campaigns. The disasters that followed killed thousands but enriched his donors. When investigators tried to hold him accountable, he used his political power to shut down inquiries and punish whistleblowers. Dr. Chen did not just conduct radiation experiments. She deliberately exposed test subjects to lethal doses while telling them they were receiving treatment for other conditions. She falsified informed consent documents. She destroyed evidence of complications. She published papers claiming successful treatments while her subjects died slowly from radiation poisoning. Executive Harrison did not just profit from environmental destruction. He ordered cover-ups of contamination events that his company caused. He suppressed research showing health impacts of industrial pollutants. He used legal threats to silence communities demanding accountability for poisoned water supplies and cancer clusters. These are not people who made difficult choices in complicated situations. These are people who deliberately chose to harm others for personal gain, who used their positions to avoid consequences, who treated human suffering as acceptable cost for their own advancement. and there are 8,450 of them sleeping in bunkers across the wasteland. 8,450 people whose preservation was predicated on their willingness to prioritize themselves over everyone else, who demonstrated through their actions that they believed some lives mattered more than others, that they had earned the right to survive when millions did not. Do people like that change? Can they change? Is 200 years in suspension long enough to argue they are different people now than they were then? Or do fundamental character traits persist, regardless of time past? I do not know. Redemption is possible in principle, but difficult in practice. People can learn and grow and become better versions of themselves. But that requires consciousness and experience and moral development that does not happen in suspended animation. The sleepers are exactly who they were when they entered their pods. They have not had 200 years to reflect and mature and reconsider their choices. For them, no subjective time has passed at all. If they wake up tomorrow, they will be the same people they were on October 23, 2077. Same values, same assumptions, same belief systems that led them to participate in Protocol Omega in the first place. They will still believe they deserved survival more than anyone else. They will still see themselves as essential to humanity's future. They will still think their expertise and knowledge justify positions of authority and control. That is what worries me most. Not that they are evil in some absolute sense, but that they are completely incapable of recognizing their own complicity in creating the apocalypse. They will wake up believing they are victims of circumstance who had no choice but to save themselves. They will not accept responsibility for the system that made nuclear war inevitable. They will not understand why anyone would question their right to inherit the rebuilt world. And if they wake up with that mindset, they will immediately start trying to reassert control. They will leverage their pre-war knowledge and skills to claim authority. They will position themselves as experts who understand how civilization should function. They will attract followers who are impressed by their education and sophistication. Within a generation, they could be back in power, rebuilding the same hierarchies that led to disaster before. Unless someone stops them. Unless someone presents the evidence of what they did and why they were preserved. Unless someone makes sure their return is not celebrated as a miracle, but examined critically as a potential threat. That is why I kept the files. That is why I am sharing this information now. Because future people need to know what they are dealing with if these sleepers ever wake up. They need to understand this is not about giving people a second chance. This is about whether a society that is finally building something better should allow the architects of the old system to return and potentially corrupt everything that has been accomplished. The NCR debates this question sometimes. I attend council meetings when they discuss bunker policy. Some representatives argue the sleepers should be woken and integrated because their knowledge could accelerate technological recovery. Some argue they should remain in suspension until the NCR has legal frameworks capable of properly addressing their crimes. Some argue they should be destroyed preemptively because the risk they represent outweighs any potential benefit. The debates are passionate and thoughtful and deeply uncomfortable. No one wants to be the person who decides to kill 8,450 people in their sleep. But no one wants to be the person responsible for waking them up if they become a threat to everything the NCR has built. The question hangs unresolved, postponed indefinitely, kicked down the road for future generations to handle. I understand the instinct to delay. Difficult decisions are easier to avoid than confront. But avoidance is itself a choice, and it has consequences. Every year the bunkers continue operating is another year the sleepers remain preserved. Another year they stay exactly as they were. Another year, the moral and practical questions remain unresolved. Eventually, someone will have to make a choice. The bunkers will not last forever. The pods will eventually fail. The systems will degrade past the point where repair is possible. At some point in the next 2 or 3 centuries, those 8,450 people will either wake up or die. There is no third option where they remain in perfect suspension indefinitely. When that moment comes, I hope whoever makes the decision has access to all the information I have preserved. I hope they understand the full context of Protocol Omega and who these people are and what they represent. I hope they make a better choice than I made when I sabotaged the wake-up protocols without telling anyone. Because my choice was made in anger and fear and self-righteousness. I looked at the evil these people had done, and I decided they did not deserve to survive. I appointed myself as judge and executioner based on nothing more than my own moral judgment. I did not consult anyone. I did not seek input or guidance. I just acted unilaterally because I believed I knew better than anyone else what the world needed. That was wrong. It was the same arrogance that the sleepers demonstrated when they decided they deserved preservation more than anyone else. The same assumption that some people are qualified to make decisions for everyone. The same belief that expertise or knowledge or moral certainty justifies overriding democratic processes and individual rights. I became what I hated. I thought I was stopping monsters, but I used monstrous methods. I thought I was protecting humanity, but I violated fundamental principles of justice and due process. I convinced myself the ends justified the means, which is exactly what the sleepers told themselves when they participated in Protocol Omega. So here is my final confession, the one that makes me most uncomfortable to admit. I do not regret what I did. I should regret it. I should feel guilty about sabotaging the wake-up protocols and trapping 10,000 people in indefinite suspension. I should be haunted by the choice I made without authorization or oversight. But I am not. I look at the world that exists now, the civilization that people built from nothing, the communities that survived and thrived without help from the preserved elite, and I think my sabotage was absolutely correct. I think those 8,450 people are better off sleeping than waking. I think society is better off without them. And that realization troubles me more than anything else. Because if I do not regret becoming a dictator who made decisions for thousands of people without their consent, if I think I was right to sabotage Protocol Omega despite having no authority to do so, then I have learned nothing from the crimes I tried to stop. I am still the same arrogant person who thinks he knows better than everyone else what the world needs. Maybe that is the real lesson of this entire story. Maybe the point is not whether the sleepers deserve to wake up, but whether anyone deserves the power to make that choice unilaterally. Maybe the question is not about justice or mercy, but about who gets to decide and how those decisions should be made. I do not have good answers anymore. I used to be certain about everything. I was certain the sleepers were monsters. I was certain they needed to be stopped. I was certain I was doing the right thing. Now I am certain of almost nothing, except that certainty itself is dangerous, that being absolutely convinced you are right is usually the moment before you do something terrible. The bunkers are still operating. The sleepers are still alive. The monitoring systems still show 8,450 stable life signs distributed across 17 sediment facilities. None of that has changed. What has changed is my understanding of what I did and why it matters, and whether I had any right to do it. If you are listening to this, and wondering what you should think about Protocol Omega, and the sleepers and my choices, I do not have a clear answer for you. I can tell you what I did and why I did it. I can share the evidence I collected and the reasoning I used. But I cannot tell you whether I was right, because I genuinely do not know anymore. What I know is this: 8,450 people are sleeping underground because I decided they should not wake up. They might sleep forever, or they might wake tomorrow, depending on choices that have not been made yet. Their fate rests with people who are still alive and conscious and capable of moral reasoning. Those people, whoever makes the final decision, they will carry the weight of choosing life or death for thousands. They will become what I became: arbiters of survival, judges of who deserves a future. They will have to live with the consequences of their choice for the rest of their lives. I do not envy them. I carry the weight of my choice every day. Every time I check the monitoring systems and see those life signs still stable after all this time, I wonder if I should have made a different choice. I wonder if I condemned people to a fate worse than death. I wonder if I prevented a threat or created a greater injustice. There are no easy answers. There are only hard questions that get harder the more you think about them. That is the truth about Protocol Omega. Not that it was a conspiracy, or a secret program, or a hidden threat. The truth is that it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice and mercy, and whether anyone has the right to decide who deserves to survive. The sleepers are still down there, preserved perfectly, waiting for someone to decide their fate. They have been waiting for 204 years. They might wait for another 200. Or they might wake up tomorrow and discover the world moved on without them. That they are relics of a failed system. That their preserved knowledge and skills are less valuable than they imagined. That future is coming, whether anyone is ready for it or not. The pods will eventually fail. The systems will degrade. At some point, suspension will end, either through planned reactivation or mechanical failure. When that moment arrives, whatever humanity has become will face the ghosts of what it once was. I hope we are ready. I hope we have built something strong enough to withstand the return of the old world elite if they wake up. I hope we have created systems resilient enough that 8,450 people cannot corrupt or destroy what took 2 centuries to build. I hope we have learned enough from our mistakes that we do not repeat them even when people from the past tell us we should. But hope is not certainty, and the future is not guaranteed. The sleepers could wake up and integrate peacefully. Or they could wake up and immediately start trying to reclaim power and status they believe they deserve. No one knows for sure, because this situation is unprecedented in human history. That uncertainty is why the files matter, why the complete truth about Protocol Omega needs to be preserved and shared. Because if the sleepers do wake up, people need to understand who they are dealing with. They need to know this is not about rescuing victims, but about managing a potential threat from the past. The evidence is in my Pip-Boy, encrypted with algorithms that will take decades to break without my cooperation. Before I die, I will make arrangements to transfer that information to trusted individuals who will ensure it reaches the right people at the right time. The truth will survive even if I do not. That is all I can do now. Share what I know. Preserve the evidence. Make sure future people have the information they need to make better choices than I made. Whether they actually use that information wisely is beyond my control. The bunkers will continue operating for another 3 centuries if nothing goes wrong. The sleepers will continue sleeping unless someone decides to wake them. The questions will remain unanswered because there are no clear answers, only different kinds of uncertainty. And I will continue checking the monitoring stations, watching those life signs pulse steadily on displays that show 8,450 people preserved in perfect suspension. 8,450 stories that ended in 2787, but might continue someday if circumstances allow. 8,450 possibilities that could represent hope or threat, depending on how you look at them. This is the secret truth about the cryo bunkers of the Wasteland. They exist. They are operational. They contain thousands of pre-war people who are still alive in every technical sense. And no one knows what to do about them. Maybe that is appropriate. Maybe some questions should not have easy answers. Maybe the complicated moral ambiguity is exactly what we need to prevent anyone from making unilateral decisions like I did. Maybe uncertainty is better than false certainty when the stakes involve thousands of lives. I do not know. After 200 years of thinking about this, I still do not know. And maybe that is the most honest thing I can say. The sleepers are still sleeping. The bunkers are still operational. The future is still unwritten. And somewhere in the Wasteland, 8,450 people are preserved in perfect suspension, waiting for a tomorrow that might never come or might arrive sooner than anyone expects. Watch the meteor showers tonight. Each streak of light might be debris from failing systems. Each flash might be the last moments of pods finally giving out after 2 centuries of operation. Each spark might be lives ending without ever waking. Or they might just be meteors, just rocks burning up in the atmosphere, just natural phenomena with no deeper meaning. That is the thing about uncertainty. You never really know until it is too late to change anything. The bunkers remain. The sleepers sleep. The questions endure. And I remain the last person who knows the complete truth, carrying evidence of crimes that may never face justice, watching status reports for people who may never wake. This is my confession. This is my warning. This is my plea for future generations to do better than I did. The past is sleeping beneath your feet. Handle it carefully when it wakes, if it wakes. 3 years have passed since I recorded that confession. 3 years of watching the bunkers, monitoring the systems, and trying to convince myself that leaving the decision to others was the right choice. But something has changed. Something that makes all my careful moral reasoning irrelevant. Something that means the sleepers might wake up whether anyone wants them to or not. It started with Bunker 11, the facility in Wyoming, one of the mid-sized installations holding 420 people. The monitoring systems showed a cascade failure in the primary coolant Sun Juan. Not catastrophic yet, but trending toward critical within 6 months. The backup systems were compensating, but they were designed for temporary use, not permanent replacement of primary cooling. I reported it to the NCR immediately. They sent a team of their best engineers, people I had trained personally in Protocol Omega systems maintenance. They spent 2 weeks analyzing the problem, running diagnostics, checking every component in the coolant chain. Their conclusion was worse than I feared. The failure was not mechanical. It was sabotage. Someone had introduced a microscopic contaminant into the coolant fluid, something that degraded the chemical properties slowly over time. The contamination was sophisticated, designed to avoid detection by automated monitoring systems. It would take decades to cause noticeable effects, but once it reached critical concentration, the cascade would be irreversible. The implications were terrifying. This was not random equipment failure. This was deliberate action by someone who understood Protocol Omega systems intimately, who knew how to damage them in ways that would not be detected until it was too late. Someone was trying to kill the sleepers. Or more accurately, Someone had been trying to kill the sleepers for decades. Chemical analysis suggested the contaminant was introduced sometime around 2180, over 80 years ago. It had been working slowly and patiently, poisoning the system from within, waiting for the moment when backup systems could no longer compensate. I checked the other bunkers immediately, all 17 facilities, running every diagnostic I could think of, looking for similar contamination patterns. The results made my blood run cold despite the cellular regeneration that was supposed to keep me calm under stress. 9 bunkers showed signs of contamination. Not Bunker 11 alone. 9 separate facilities across thousands of miles, all compromised with the same sophisticated sabotage. Whoever did this had access to multiple sites. They had detailed technical knowledge. They had been planning this for at least a century. And they were still out there, still active, still working to ensure the sleepers never woke up. The NCR Council convened an emergency session. I presented the evidence, explained the technical details, outlined the timeline. We had maybe a year before the first bunker failed completely. Maybe 2 years before the cascade spread to all 9 compromised facilities. After that, we would lose over 4,000 sleepers to system failures that would cook them alive as temperatures rose uncontrollably. The debate was intense and immediate. Some council members argued this proved the sleepers should be destroyed preemptively. If someone was already trying to kill them, why not finish the job cleanly rather than letting them die slowly from sabotaged systems? Others argued this was precisely why the sleepers needed to be woken immediately, to save them from whoever was trying to murder them in their sleep. But I noticed something strange during the debate. One council member, a woman named Director Sarah Chen, remained silent through the entire discussion. She did not vote. She did not speak. She just watched with an expression I could not quite read. When the session ended without resolution, she approached me privately. "Dr. Reeves," she said quietly, "we need to talk about your cellular regeneration therapy." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "What about it?" "The treatment you received in 2065, the one that let you survive 2 centuries. Where exactly did that technology come from?" I had never questioned it deeply. The therapy had been presented to me as experimental military research, something developed for long-duration space missions. I had volunteered, undergone the treatments, and accepted the results without investigating the source too carefully. But now, with Director Chen staring at me with knowing eyes, I realized I should have asked more questions. "I don't know the complete provenance," I admitted. "Why does it matter?" "Because that same therapy was used on someone else," Director Chen said. "Someone who would have the access, the knowledge, and the motivation to sabotage Protocol Omega facilities. Someone who has been alive just as long as you have." She pulled out a file, old paper documents that looked like they had been preserved carefully for decades. "This is a classified report from 2066. It documents a secondary test group for the cellular regeneration program. 5 people total. You were Subject 1. The others were Subjects 2 through 5. All of them were Protocol Omega personnel. All of them were given the therapy to ensure they could oversee the project across multiple decades." I took the file with hands that were suddenly unsteady. Inside were photographs, medical records, biographical summaries. Subject 2 was a woman named Dr. Patricia Winters, a biochemist who had worked on the cryogenic fluid formulations. Subject 3 was Colonel James Morrison, head of security for all Protocol Omega sites. Subject 4 was an engineer named Robert Chen, no relation to Director Sarah Chen, but someone whose face looked familiar from old project meetings. And Subject 5. Subject 5 was someone I recognized immediately, Dr. Helen Ashworth, my direct supervisor during Protocol Omega development. The woman who had recruited me to the project. The woman who had shown me the hidden files revealing the truth about who the sleepers were. The woman I thought had died in the nuclear war because I never saw her after October 23, 2077. Ashworth is alive, I whispered. More than alive, Director Chen confirmed. She has been operating in the Wasteland under assumed names for 2 centuries. We have been tracking her movements for the last decade without realizing who she was. She goes by different identities, never stays in one place long, but the pattern is clear. Every location she visits, every settlement she passes through, is positioned near a Protocol Omega bunker site. She is the saboteur. We believe so. The contamination timeline matches her travel patterns. The technical sophistication matches her expertise. And most importantly, she has motive. According to the hidden files you mentioned in your confession, Dr. Ashworth was not just researching the sleepers. She was one of them. She was scheduled for suspension in Bunker 4 before the war. I felt reality shifting around me. If she was supposed to be frozen, why is she walking around the wasteland sabotaging facilities? That is what we need you to find out, Director Chen said, because she has been leaving messages, coded transmissions on old military frequencies. We intercepted one 3 days ago. It was addressed to you specifically, Dr. Reeves. She knows you are alive. She knows you sabotaged the wake-up protocols, and she wants to meet. The transmission was brief and encoded with a cipher I recognized from Protocol Omega internal communications. Once decrypted, the message was simple and direct. Marcus, I know what you did. I know why you did it. And I have been doing the same thing for twice as long. We need to talk before the NCR makes a terrible mistake. Come to the ruins of Bunker 4 in Colorado. Come alone. We have a lot to discuss about the people we condemned to eternal sleep, and why they might need to stay that way forever. Helen. Every instinct told me this was a trap. Helen Ashworth had been sabotaging bunkers for decades. She had poisoned coolant systems that would kill thousands. She was a murderer operating in the wasteland with impunity. Meeting her alone in an abandoned bunker was suicidal. But I needed to understand. I needed to know why she did it. Why she targeted specific bunkers. What she knew that I did not. The contamination pattern was not random. She had sabotaged 9 facilities but left 8 others completely untouched. There was a pattern, a selection process, that suggested she was not trying to kill all the sleepers, but only certain ones. I told the NCR Council I would go. They wanted to send security teams, surveillance drones, enough firepower to ensure Helen could not escape if she proved hostile. I convinced them to let me go alone as the message requested. If Helen suspected a trap, she would disappear, and we would never get answers. We needed information more than we needed capture. Thomas volunteered to accompany me despite the message's instructions. He had been with me since the beginning of this investigation, and he insisted he would not let me walk into danger without backup. We compromised. He would come, but stay hidden at least a mile from the bunker entrance. If I did not emerge within 6 hours, he would return to NCR territory and report what happened. The journey to Colorado took 8 days. Bunker 4 was in mountainous terrain, accessible only through old hiking trails that had become overgrown and treacherous over 2 centuries. The bunker entrance was disguised as a collapsed mine shaft, exactly like the other facilities. Nothing about it suggested the sophisticated installation hidden hundreds of feet underground. Helen was waiting at the entrance. She looked exactly as I remembered from before the war, maybe slightly older, but not much. The cellular regeneration had preserved her just as effectively as it had preserved me. She wore Wasteland clothing, practical and worn, with a rifle slung across her back, and a Pip-Boy on her wrist, showing active monitoring of bunker systems. "Marcus," she said with a slight smile, "you look good for someone who should be dead 3 times over." "I could say the same about you," I replied carefully, "though apparently you have been busy for the last 2 centuries. Busy is one word for it." She gestured toward the bunker entrance. "Shall we go inside? The systems are still operational. I have been maintaining them personally. I think you will be interested in what I have to show you." We descended through darkness lit only by Pip-Boy lights. The elevator shaft was intact but unpowered, requiring us to climb down emergency ladders for hundreds of feet. The temperature dropped as we descended, the air becoming colder and staler. By the time we reached the bottom, my breath was fogging in the frigid air, despite the cellular regeneration keeping my core temperature stable. The bunker interior was pristine. Emergency lighting had activated when we entered, revealing corridors lined with gleaming metal walls and floors that showed no signs of decay or deterioration. This facility had been maintained far better than any other Protocol Omega site I had visited. Helen led me through the corridors to the cryogenic chamber. The pods were arranged in neat rows, exactly as designed. But something was different. Many of the pods were empty, their glass viewing ports dark, their monitoring systems showing null readings. Out of 500 original occupants, only about 150 pods showed active life signs. "You have been waking them," I said, understanding dawning. "Not waking," Helen corrected. "Terminating. Specifically and carefully terminating the ones who needed to die." She walked between the pod rows, her hand trailing along the smooth metal surfaces. When I found out what Protocol Omega really was, when I saw the files showing who these people were and what they had done, I had a choice to make. I was scheduled for suspension in this very bunker. My pod was prepared. My processing was complete. All I had to do was lie down and let the system freeze me alongside all these other monsters. "But you did not." "No, because unlike you, Marcus, I had more time to think before the bombs fell. I had months to consider what I had discovered, and I reached a different conclusion than you did." Helen stopped at one particular pod. Inside was a woman, frozen perfectly, her face serene in suspended animation. According to the pod identification label, this was Dr. Margaret Walsh, a biochemist who had developed several of the toxins used in Protocol Omega's planned population cleansing. "You sabotaged the wake-up protocols for everyone," Helen continued. "You made a blanket decision that all the sleepers should remain frozen. But that assumes they are all equally guilty, that they all deserve the same fate. I have spent 200 years reviewing every file, every document, every piece of evidence about who these people were. And I found something you missed." She pulled up data on her Pip-Boy, displaying records that I had never seen before. Not everyone in these bunkers was complicit in the worst crimes. About 30% of the sleepers were support personnel, technical staff, people who had skills Protocol Omega needed, but who were not part of the decision-making apparatus. They were just engineers and doctors and scientists doing their jobs without understanding the full implications. That does not excuse them. No, it does not excuse them. But it means they do not deserve death. So I have been conducting triage, going through each bunker, reviewing each sleeper's file, determining who was truly responsible for atrocities and who was merely complicit through ignorance or coercion. The ones who made decisions that killed millions, the ones who profited from suffering, The ones who actively promoted the system that led to nuclear war. Those I have terminated. The others I have left alive. I stared at the occupied pods, understanding the magnitude of what she was telling me. You have been acting as judge and executioner for 2 centuries. Just like you, Helen said quietly. Except I have been doing it more carefully, more precisely. You trapped everyone in suspension without discrimination. I have been selecting specifically who deserves to stay frozen and who deserves to die. The contamination you discovered is not designed to kill everyone. It is designed to kill specific individuals in specific bunkers. The 93 sleepers in Bunker 11 who will die when that system fails are all war criminals. Every single one of them made decisions that directly led to mass casualties. And the innocent ones in that bunker? There are no innocent ones in Bunker 11. I checked personally. That is why I chose it for contamination. Other bunkers have mixed populations, combinations of criminals and support staff. Those I have been processing manually, terminating the guilty while preserving the potentially redeemable. Helen pulled up a comprehensive spreadsheet on her Pip-Boy. It showed all 23 bunkers, all 10,000 original sleepers, with detailed notes about each individual. Color coding indicated categories: red for those she had already terminated, yellow for those she had marked for contamination death, green for those she judged might deserve eventual awakening. Out of 10,000 original sleepers, Helen had marked only 847 as potentially redeemable. Everyone else was coded for termination, either through direct action or through the carefully planned system failures she had engineered. "You are insane," I said, though the words lacked conviction. Because what she was describing was methodical and reasoned, just horrifyingly comprehensive. "I am practical," Helen countered. "You wanted to trap them all forever. The NCR wants to wake them all or kill them all. Both approaches ignore the nuance. These are not all monsters or all victims. They are individuals who made individual choices. Some of those choices warrant death. Some warrant imprisonment. Some might warrant eventual freedom if the world is ever ready to integrate them safely. Who gave you the right to make those distinctions? The same authority that gave you the right to sabotage the wake-up protocols. None. We both appointed ourselves as judges because no one else was qualified or willing. The difference is that I have been more thorough in my research and more precise in my executions. I wanted to argue, but she was right. I had made the same assumption she had, that someone needed to make decisions about the sleeper's fate. I had just been lazier about it, condemning everyone equally instead of doing the hard work of evaluating each individual case. "Why show me this?" I asked. "Why bring me here?" "Because the NCR is about to make a catastrophic mistake," Helen said urgently. "They are debating whether to wake all the sleepers to save them from the contamination. They think this is a rescue operation. They do not understand that waking everyone means releasing hundreds of war criminals into a world that cannot contain them. We need to work together to ensure only the right people survive. The right people according to your judgment, according to evidence and reason. Marcus, I have spent 2 centuries on this project. I have reviewed every file multiple times. I have cross-referenced testimonies and documents. I have built the most comprehensive case file on Protocol Omega war crimes that exists anywhere. The people I have marked for termination are not innocent. They are responsible for atrocities that make the nuclear war itself look restrained by comparison." She pulled up specific examples. Senator Morrison, who I remembered from my own research, but with additional evidence I had never seen. Video recordings of him personally ordering the execution of whistleblowers. audio transcripts of him planning false flag operations to justify war appropriations, financial records showing he profited from defense contracts that required active warfare to remain lucrative. This man, Helen said, pointing to Morrison's file, personally ordered the deaths of at least 3,000 people before the war, not in combat, not as collateral damage, direct assassinations of people who threatened his political power or financial interests. He used black ops teams, manufactured accidents, and political persecution. He destroyed lives systematically for personal gain. She pulled up another file. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the radiation researcher. This woman conducted experiments that killed 200 test subjects over 15 years. She knew they were dying. She falsified consent forms. She lied to families. She published papers claiming success while destroying evidence of the bodies piling up. She did this knowingly and deliberately because the research advanced her career. File after file, Helen showed me evidence I had never seen. The hidden documents I had found in 2073 were just the beginning. Helen had spent decades compiling additional evidence, tracking down surviving records, interviewing witnesses who remembered the pre-war era. She had built prosecutorial cases that would hold up in any court of law, documenting crimes so severe that execution would be considered merciful. These people cannot be allowed to wake up, Helen insisted. They cannot be integrated into society. They cannot be rehabilitated. They are fundamentally dangerous individuals who would immediately begin seeking power and control. The world has moved beyond them. We cannot let them drag it backward. So you have been killing them in their sleep. I have been executing war criminals who would never face justice otherwise. Yes, and I have been doing it carefully and methodically with full documentation of why each termination was justified. When this is over, I will present my complete case files to whoever wants to judge me. I will accept whatever consequences society decides are appropriate. But the executions needed to happen whether anyone approved or not. I understood her logic. I even agreed with much of it. The sleepers she had targeted were genuinely monsters. The evidence was overwhelming. They had done terrible things and escaped consequences through Protocol Omega. Letting them die in suspension was arguably the most just outcome available given the circumstances. But something about Helen's certainty bothered me. The way she talked about her judgment as if it were objective fact rather than personal interpretation. The way she had spent 2 centuries becoming more convinced of her own righteousness rather than more uncertain. She had all the signs of someone who had lived too long alone with their own thoughts, who had lost the ability to question their own conclusions. What about the 847 you marked as potentially redeemable? I asked. What is your plan for them? That depends on you, Helen said. The NCR trusts you. They will listen to your recommendations. If you support me, if you help me convince them that selective termination is the right approach, we can save those 847 while ensuring the war criminals die. We can give the innocent ones a chance at life while removing the threat that the guilty represent. And if I do not support you? Helen's expression hardened. Then the NCR will likely wake everyone in a misguided rescue operation. They will integrate hundreds of war criminals into their society. Within a generation, those criminals will have wormed their way into positions of power. They will corrupt the NCR from within. They will rebuild the same systems that led to nuclear war. And humanity will march toward a second apocalypse, this time with no one left to sabotage the doomsday protocols. That is speculation. It is pattern recognition. These people have spent their entire lives seeking and maintaining power. They know how to manipulate systems. They know how to exploit democratic processes. They know how to present themselves as experts and leaders while serving only their own interests. Give them access to the NCR, and they will take over within decades. It is not a possibility. It is an inevitability. I wanted to argue, but I could not dismiss her concerns entirely. The sleepers had been selected specifically for their ability to thrive in power structures. They had demonstrated willingness to compromise ethics for personal advancement. Integrating them into NCR society would be dangerous even under the best circumstances. "You are asking me to approve mass execution without trial," I said. "I am asking you to recognize that trial is impossible under these circumstances. How do you put someone on trial for crimes committed in a world that no longer exists? How do you find witnesses when everyone who could testify is dead? How do you apply laws that were never written to address these specific crimes? The legal framework does not exist. The only thing that exists is the evidence in these files and the judgment of people who understand what these sleepers represent. People like you and me. Yes, people like you and me. We are the only ones who have the historical knowledge, the technical expertise, and the moral clarity to make these decisions. We appointed ourselves to these roles, but now that we are here, we have responsibility to see it through properly." Helen pulled up a final file, one that made my breath catch. It was my own dossier from Protocol Omega, my photograph from 2076, my complete medical history, my performance reviews, my security clearances, and at the bottom, a notation I had never seen before. Subject 1. Approved for cellular regeneration therapy. Purpose: long-term project oversight and post-war reconstruction leadership. "You were never just an engineer," Helen said quietly. "You were selected for regeneration therapy because they wanted you to survive the war. They wanted you to wake the sleepers when the time was right. They wanted you to help integrate them into the rebuilt world. You were part of the plan, Marcus. You were supposed to be their shepherd into the future." I stared at the file, feeling pieces of understanding click into place. The therapy had not been offered to me randomly. I had been chosen deliberately, screened and selected and groomed for a specific role in Protocol Omega's long-term plans. Everything I thought I had discovered on my own had been intended for me to find eventually. "They knew someone might sabotage the wake-up protocols," Helen continued, "so they created backup plans. You were backup plan Alpha. If the primary systems failed, you would survive long enough to restore them. That is why your credentials could override the central control system. That is why you were given access to sensitive files. They were training you to be their failsafe. But I turned against them. Yes, because they underestimated your capacity for moral reasoning. They thought selecting someone competent and giving them purpose would ensure loyalty. They did not account for the possibility that you would genuinely understand what they were doing and reject it. They picked someone smart enough to manage their systems, but did not consider that intelligence might lead to opposition." Helen smiled slightly. "I had the opposite problem. They gave me the therapy because they wanted a long-term researcher to monitor cryogenic systems across centuries. They thought my scientific mindset would keep me focused on technical problems rather than ethical ones. They were wrong about both of us." "How many others received the therapy?" 5 total, as the file shows. You and me, and 3 others. Colonel Morrison died in 2009 from radiation exposure that overwhelmed his regeneration. Dr. Winters died in 2143 from a raider attack. Robert Chen disappeared in 2198 and is presumed dead, though we never found a body. That leaves just you and me. The only two people alive who truly understand Protocol Omega and have the lifespan to see this situation through to conclusion. I processed this information slowly. Everything I thought I understood about my role in Protocol Omega had been incomplete. I was not a whistleblower or a saboteur. I was a fail-safe mechanism that malfunctioned, a backup plan that turned against its creators. The irony was almost funny. "What do you want from me, Helen?" "I want you to help me finish what we both started," she said simply. "I want you to review my case files and confirm my assessments are accurate. I want you to present the evidence to the NCR in a way they will accept. I want you to help me save the 847 who might deserve life while eliminating the threats that cannot be allowed to wake. And then I want us to both accept whatever judgment society renders on us for making these choices. You are offering to face justice? I am accepting that justice requires judgment. Someone needs to judge the sleepers, and someone needs to judge us for judging them. I am comfortable with that recursion. I have done what I believed was right based on evidence and reason. If future people decide I was wrong, I will accept that conclusion. But the executions needed to happen regardless. I thought about Thomas waiting a mile away, about the NCR Council debating bunker policy, about 8,450 sleepers distributed across 17 facilities. I thought about the contamination spreading through coolant systems, about the cascade failures that would kill thousands in the next year if nothing changed. And I thought about the 847 people Helen had marked as potentially redeemable. Engineers who just did their jobs, doctors who just treated patients, scientists who just conducted research without understanding the larger implications, people who were complicit but not directly responsible for atrocities, people who might deserve a second chance if second chances were possible. "I need to see your complete files," I said finally. "All of them. Every case file. Every piece of evidence. Every justification for every termination. I need to review your work independently and confirm your assessments are sound." "Of course," Helen agreed immediately. She handed me a data chip. "Everything is here. 20 decades of research, 50,000 pages of documentation, complete dossiers on all 10,000 original sleepers with evidence and analysis for each one. Take as long as you need. Review everything. Challenge my conclusions. If you find errors in my judgment, tell me. This is too important for ego or pride." I took the chip, feeling its weight in my hand. This small piece of technology contained the most comprehensive record of Protocol Omega crimes ever assembled. It represented 2 centuries of one woman's obsessive investigation into who deserved to live and who deserved to die. "I will need time," I said. "We do not have much time. The contamination in Bunker 11 will reach critical failure in approximately 5 months. The NCR will likely make their decision about rescue operations within 3 months. You have 12 weeks maximum to review my work and reach a conclusion. That is not enough time to properly review 50,000 pages of documentation. It is the time we have. The alternative is that you make your decision without reviewing anything, which is what you did last time when you sabotaged the wake-up protocols for everyone without discrimination. At least now, you will have actual evidence to base your judgment on." She was right again, and I hated that she was right. I had acted precipitously before, making sweeping decisions based on incomplete information. Now I had the opportunity to be more thoughtful, more careful, more precise in my moral reasoning. "I will review your files," I agreed, "but I am not promising to support your approach. If I find your judgments unsound, if I conclude the terminations are not justified, I will oppose you openly." "That is acceptable," Helen said. "I would rather have your informed opposition than your uninformed support. The decisions we make here will echo for centuries. They need to be made correctly, even if that means we disagree about methodology." We emerged from Bunker 4 together, climbing back up through hundreds of feet of darkness. Thomas was waiting at the surface, rifle ready, clearly relieved to see me alive. Helen nodded to him politely, and then walked away into the wasteland without another word, disappearing into the landscape as if she had never been there. Thomas had questions, but I was not ready to answer them. I needed time to process what I had learned. I needed to review Helen's files. I needed to figure out if her 2-century campaign of selective execution was justice or murder, or something more complicated than either word could capture. The journey back to NCR territory took 9 days. I spent every evening reviewing files on my Pip-Boy, reading case studies, examining evidence, checking Helen's reasoning against the documentation she had compiled. The work was exhaustive and exhausting. Every file represented a human life, a person who had made choices and faced consequences and now existed in frozen suspension, waiting for someone to decide their fate. Some cases were straightforward. Senator Morrison's file was damning beyond any reasonable doubt. He had ordered assassinations, orchestrated false flag operations, profited from war while sending others to die. His crimes were documented through video evidence, financial records, testimony from surviving witnesses. Helen's decision to terminate him was justified by any standard of justice I could imagine. But other cases were more complicated. Dr. Sarah Liu had been a bioweapons researcher who developed toxins used in Protocol Omega's planned population cleansing. But her research notes suggested she believed she was developing defensive countermeasures, protection against attacks, rather than weapons for offense. Her supervisors had lied to her about the purpose of her work. She had discovered the truth only months before the war and had attempted to destroy her research before being forced into suspension. Helen had marked Liu for preservation, concluding that deception from superiors mitigated her responsibility. But was that correct? Liu had created weapons that would have killed millions. Did good intentions matter when the outcomes were catastrophic? Did being deceived excuse participation in atrocities? I spent hours on Liu's case alone, reviewing every document, trying to determine if Helen's mercy was justified. I reached no firm conclusion. The questions were too complex, the moral calculus too uncertain. Liu was simultaneously guilty and innocent depending on how you weighted different factors. And if I struggled with one case, how could I possibly evaluate all 10,000? How could anyone make definitive judgments about complicated human beings based on documentation that was inevitably incomplete? Helen had spent 2 centuries on this project, and still some of her assessments felt uncertain. How could I validate her work in 12 weeks? The answer was that I could not. Not completely, not with certainty. But I could look for patterns in her reasoning, check for consistency in her methodology, identify obvious errors or biases. I could treat this like an engineering problem, verify the system logic, even if I could not verify every individual calculation. Over the next 8 weeks, I reviewed approximately 3,000 files. I could not read everything in the time available, so I sampled strategically. I focused on cases Helen had marked for termination, looking for errors in her reasoning or evidence that did not support her conclusions. I checked her work the way I would check calculations on a critical engineering project, assuming mistakes existed and trying to find them. I found surprisingly few errors. Helen's methodology was consistent and rigorous. She had developed clear criteria for assessing individual responsibility: direct decision-making authority, knowledge of consequences, ability to refuse participation, personal profit from harmful actions. She weighted these factors systematically, documenting her reasoning for every conclusion. The cases she marked for termination generally involved people who had direct authority, full knowledge, freedom to refuse, and personal benefit from harmful actions. The cases she marked for preservation generally involved people who lacked one or more of those factors. The system was not perfect, but it was thoughtful and defensible. I found maybe 30 cases where I disagreed with her assessments. Individuals she had marked for termination who I thought deserved preservation, or vice versa. But 30 disputed cases out of 3,000 reviewed meant her accuracy rate was 99%. That was better than any human judgment system I had encountered. The remaining question was philosophical rather than evidential. Did anyone have the right to make these judgments at all? Even if Helen's assessments were accurate, even if her methodology was sound, was selective execution without trial justified under any circumstances? I consulted with Thomas during this period. He was younger than me by 2 centuries, born into the Wasteland rather than the pre-war world. His perspective was invaluable because he represented the people who would inherit whatever decision I made. In the Wasteland, we have rough justice, Thomas said when I explained the dilemma. Raiders attack a settlement, survivors hunt them down and execute them without trial. No one objects because the alternative is letting dangerous people roam free. Is this different? The sleepers are not actively threatening anyone, I pointed out. They are unconscious in pods. Executing them requires deliberate choice rather than defensive action. But they would be threatening if they woke up, right? Based on what you have told me about who they are and what they did. Executing them prevents future harm rather than responding to immediate danger. That is still defensive. It is preemptive. War is preemptive. You attack enemies before they attack you. Raiders scout caravans before they rob them. We execute them before they can strike again. Time does not change the moral calculation. I considered his argument. The Wasteland had developed its own moral framework, one shaped by scarcity and danger, and the constant threat of violence. By Wasteland standards, preemptive execution of known threats was not controversial. It was survival. But I was not sure Wasteland morality should be the standard for these decisions. The sleepers existed in a liminal state, neither alive nor dead, neither present nor absent. They represented the past intruding on the present in ways the Wasteland had never had to contemplate before. What would you do, I asked Thomas, if the decision was yours alone? He thought for a long moment. I would wake the ones who might be innocent. Give them a chance to prove they have changed or that they were not as guilty as the records suggest. I would execute the ones who are definitely monsters, because letting them live risks too many other lives. And I would accept that I might be wrong about some of them, but that uncertainty is not a reason to avoid making choices. That is essentially what Helen is proposing. Then maybe she is right. Or maybe you are both right and both wrong, and there is no completely correct answer. Maybe this is one of those situations where any choice is bad, but some choices are less bad than others. I returned to the NCR capital with my analysis complete. The council convened to hear my report. I presented Helen's methodology, explained her reasoning, showed examples of her case files. I walked them through the evidence documenting Protocol Omega crimes. I outlined the criteria she had used to distinguish between those who deserved execution and those who deserved preservation. And then I gave my recommendation. Helen Ashworth's work is methodologically sound, I told the council, Her assessments are accurate based on available evidence. Her reasoning is consistent and defensible. She has built the most comprehensive understanding of protocol omega crimes that exists anywhere. I believe her conclusions about individual responsibility are generally correct. However, I continued, I cannot endorse extrajudicial execution without oversight. What Helen is proposing is systematic killing of prisoners who cannot defend themselves or appeal their sentences. That violates fundamental principles of justice, regardless of how guilty they might be. We cannot claim to be building a better society while using methods that the old world would